So we did a poll as to whether you wanted us to do a year in review video, and the poll numbers came through after hundreds of votes. And here is the year in review immigration news of 2021. For us itself, it has been a busy year, at least on the YouTube channel. We've had 31,000 views of our videos, 20,000 hours of watch time, and 3,600 new subscribers. So thank you for all of that. That of course is over 63 videos we've posted this year before this one, which have been shared over 8,000 times. That's honestly kind of scary, and from me to all of you, thank you for watching these videos. It really does sort of encourage me to make more, and I hope they are of use. And yeah, I said please share this video, as it just did take quite some time to put together over the last few days. However, we're going to look at the bigger picture. Now, after 2020, I think we all thought that 2021 just couldn't be that bad. But for many of you, I think it perhaps has been worse, as it's just dragged things out. Promises were broken, and those offshore just really feel forgotten about. Now, as I sit in my office wondering when they're going to fix the air conditioning, I thought that perhaps we would do the year in review, and we'll sort of do it month by month. Now, we're not going to cover every single event in the past year, as a number of things happened, but we're going to just focus on what we feel are perhaps the bigger points of each month. My name is Aaron Hunt. I'm a partner here at the law firm Stace Hammond. It is December 31st, the last day of 2021. It's about 8:40 a.m. in the morning. As always, this is not legal advice. This is just our commentary on immigration here in New Zealand. If you are looking for legal advice, we are still open. I am still in the office working. Get in contact with us and we can see how we can help you. Links in the description below. Please share this video, and if it helped you at any point in 2021, please leave us a Google review. It really does help get our message out there to the world. Now, the year started slowly, with the government having very long holidays, as they do. The first real announcement was in the middle of the month, with 1,000 students who had previously been in New Zealand studying being able to apply to return. There was no word as to when future students would be able to enter, but it was welcome news for those who were midway through a degree and had been caught offshore. The other big news that month was, of course, the Wiggles, who had been granted emergency MIQ spaces while families continue to be separated and Kiwis still fought to return to their country. We don't hold that against the Wiggles, but still question why the Prime Minister and the Minister of Immigration and a senior National MP felt that children entertainers outranked the families of critical health staff. February 2021 was a surprisingly quiet month. We had a lockdown announced on Valentine's Day and another a couple of weeks later. For immigration, the big news was the crackdown on nurses coming to New Zealand to do their CAP course. Now, many of them had fallen victim to unlicensed agents, unaware of the issues they were creating for themselves. Now, we've actually investigated several of these to the point we've provided evidence to Immigration New Zealand about a company that was misleading applicants in the belief that they were using licensed agents when actually they weren't. And Immigration New Zealand hasn't budged. Now, we believe that these people should be seen as being victims of scammers, and not being seen as being having bona fide issues and trying to mislead Immigration New Zealand. As there was no intention to mislead Immigration New Zealand, they themselves were misled by these scammers. We also saw a lot of media coverage around our campaign to get partners of critical medical staff into New Zealand. Now, the Minister of Immigration admitted that he was aware of the inequality that existed, in that new critical health workers could bring their families with them to New Zealand, but those who were already in New Zealand couldn't, forcing these people to leave the country, to go offshore, and then to reapply to come into New Zealand with their partners. Now, the Minister stated that the government was not in the business of giving people false hope. But it seems that with this government, it seems to help to be a children's entertainer rather than a paediatrician with family offshore. One good bit of news was a further extension to visitor visas for those who are onshore, and in a waiver from the requirement to have to be offshore for a certain period of time. This allowed people in New Zealand to remain safely in the country, in the safety that had been created by those in the country to keep COVID out. March started with a massive increase in MIQ costs for those who could actually even get a spot in MIQ. There was an announcement about a new Immigration New Zealand system for all applications would get moved to by the end of the year, which, well, we're still waiting for that. We also did hear that the Minister would announce an SMC draw date soon. And there was a massive increase in the number of scams for those who were targeting those who were offshore and trying to bring them into New Zealand. This wasn't helped by the fact that scammers could easily apply for a NZETA, New Zealand Electronic Travel Authority. They provided the person's details on an Immigration New Zealand website, and to someone offshore could look like a visa. While created for those from visa waiver countries, it could be applied for a person from any other country. Our request to Immigration New Zealand to lock this down to just visa waiver countries, or to remove it altogether, especially when visa waivers can't currently be used, especially because nobody is travelling through New Zealand, went unheard, leading to more people being scammed of their life savings. And on about 10th of March, Erica Stanford MP would give a brilliant speech to Parliament where we would hear the word anomaly. This would be a word we will see mentioned a lot, seemingly as an excuse for something that should have been noticed in the first place.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This government has made a very conscious decision to constrain the space in MIQ, thereby having to juggle returning Kiwis, emergency returnees, critical workers and split migrant families. But it has been their absolute inability to manage these competing interests that has seen film stars and nannies, bands and children's entertainers manage to jump ahead of the queue that everyone else is having to wait in, that's causing so many problems. And all of these issues at MIQ have been are significant because we have a crisis that is unfolding in New Zealand in our own backyard. Migrants who have given up absolutely everything to be here have been separated from their partners and their children for a year due to the border closure and the plagued MIQ system. They are here because we need them. They are our skilled maths teachers. They are our nurses, our engineers, our tech experts and our construction workers. And we invited them to come here. In 2019, this government spent $600,000 marketing to them to say, hey, come to New Zealand because we need you. But the message now is all very different. Despite our Prime Minister stating in May last year that she would make it a priority to get these split migrant families back with their families, nothing has been said and nothing has been done. The government's deafening silence rings so very loudly in these migrants' ears. It says, we do not want you, we do not value you, go home. That's what this government is saying to them. And the Minister for Immigration, Chris Farfoy, had the perfect opportunity to start this process of reunification in June last year. We know this because he was briefed by multiple times by his officials on the heartbreaking anomaly where our migrant nurses who came to New Zealand just prior to lockdown were unable to bring their families to join them, where the 500 nurses who have come in since the borders closed have been able to bring their loved ones here. So for 9 months he has willfully ignored the desperate pleas of these nurses who have not been able to hold their babies for up to 15 months in some cases.
In April, the government announced that it wanted to extend the Minister's emergency powers until May 2023. At the time, we did say that this wasn't an indication that the border won't open until that point, but 7 months later, we aren't as confident about that. What we do know is that it's really hard to know when things are going to open. However, the extension was to the point where we actually did submit to Parliament in opposition to such a long extension, as we thought that giving him another couple of years of this power was perhaps a bit too far. A week into the month, and New Zealand was seeing a lot of infected people arriving in New Zealand from India, leading to New Zealand banning all travellers from India until the end of April 2021. With MIQ being booked out months in advance, this created problems for a number of travellers who all of a sudden were unable to use that rare MIQ space they had managed to book. We did have a great protest at Parliament for split families, followed by the following day by another great speech from Erica Stanford MP, which we'll share a little of now.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. On a very unusually beautiful day in Wellington yesterday, out here on the forecourt, a protest came to Parliament, the Split Migrant Families Protest. They came from all over New Zealand. They made the journey yesterday. They held placards, they held photos of the children they hadn't seen in a year. The placards told us how many days they hadn't been able to hold their children for. They have no voice. They came to Parliament yesterday to call for an urgent Select Committee inquiry so that they would have a voice. And we heard them yesterday. The National Party MPs that went down there to the forecourt yesterday, we heard them. The Green Party members, to their credit, heard them as well, and so did the ACT Party members. In fact, almost every party in this House heard their message. But where were Labour?
Where were they?
Where was Priyanka Radhakrishnan, the Minister for Ethnic Communities, sticking up for ethnic communities? Where was she yesterday? Was she there? No, she wasn't there. What about Ibrahim Omar, a migrant himself who told us this wonderful story in the House during his maiden speech, which brought me to tears. It was a fantastic speech of his struggles in this country as a migrant. Where was he yesterday to stick up for the migrant families who were here yesterday telling us about their struggles? Well, he wasn't there. Where was Maya Lubeck? Where was Vanushi Walters? Where was Naisi Chen? Where was Dr. Gaurav Sharma? Not a single Labour MP yesterday came down to care for these split migrant families. Not a single one of them yesterday. And the PM has always heralded her super diverse caucus, this wonderful UN of a caucus that she has. But where was this wonderful diverse caucus yesterday, when in probably the first opportunity they've had here in Parliament to stick up for our migrant communities, our ethnic communities, where were they?
We had written to the Minister on behalf of partners of critical health workers several times, but the Minister had responded each of those times, refusing to get involved. Sadly, it seems he would not get involved for the family of healthcare workers. That seemed to be a privilege just to athletes and entertainers. One of the first big responses against the government's approach to immigration came from the Ombudsman this month, who noted that the priority approach being given to applicants before a certain date were unlawful, leading to Immigration New Zealand offering refunds to those who had applied before that date for skilled migrant category applications. And finally, the government gave a broader exception to the partners and family of critical health workers who were already on shore. That anomaly that had existed previously was finally fixed, and perhaps that may have been the favourite video I did that year after working on that matter for so many months. We also did hear the Minister would be announcing the SMC draw date soon for those EOIs in the pool. In May, the horribly named Accredited Employer Work Visa was officially delayed until November 2021, as we got some basic details on it, which didn't really provide anything more than we already knew. The government did push through its extension to the Minister's powers through to May 2023, ignoring all of the objections to that. I had the pleasure of speaking at a protest on the steps of Parliament. Now, I want to point out here that the Minister did actually show up and speak, and for that we give him some respect, because it was a crowd that was feeling very let down and was, well, not too appreciative of his work or lack of. What actually drew us to Parliament that day, though, was the reading of several of the immigration petitions. It was great to hear Tinsey's name, one of the regular viewers of this channel for a long, long time, as her petition was, she was actually mentioned in the opening speech of that session for a petition that she had written to Parliament regarding immigration. Now, there was many people there to support that reading. It was actually pretty much a fuller house in the viewers watching down. However, the Minister decided to leave halfway through the petitions being read, and those in the audience watching did notice him leaving and weren't happy, and had to actually be warned several times by the Speaker to be quiet. They would have been even less happy, though, had they noticed, had they known about a change that had been made to the operational manual actually in the week of the protest. This wasn't actually noticed for several weeks, and it tied living together to genuine and stable, something that hadn't been a rule until November 2020, when it appears that someone at immigration decided that to be genuine and stable, you must have lived together at some point. That change in interpretation was snuck into the operational manual in that week of the protest, and it took a few weeks before anybody noticed. Now, prior to his leaving the House on that day of the immigration talks at Parliament, the issue with the older children of skilled migrant applicants was the next anomaly to be sounded out, and the Minister stated the following.
There is one statement I made in Tuesday night's annual review about the dependent children of residency visa applicants who are turning 18. For clarification, if a person in this situation applied for a student visa, they would need to pay international fees. However, they would be eligible for a work visa. But, Mr Speaker, what I absolutely stand by is this government's management of the border. Our border settings have saved lives, kept our economy strong, and is keeping everyone in New Zealand safe.
Hold on.
Supplementary question. Could the Minister explain what visa an 18-year-old with no experience or qualifications would get that would put them on a pathway to residence?
Mr Speaker, there are a number of options available to someone in that situation. As I mentioned in the annual review debate on Tuesday, I clarified that situation. Someone in that situation could apply for a work visa if they separated their application from the residency application of their parents.
Which exact work visa could an 18-year-old with no experience and no skill apply for that would put them on a pathway to residence?
Mr Speaker, I'm not sure precisely what visa they would go for. I'm sure there are many options available to them. But what I would say, Mr Speaker, is that the situation with the processing of visas is a difficult one in terms of the skilled migrant category at the moment. And I will acknowledge the fact that the demand in the SMC category has increased. The processing of those applications are not rubber stamps. They are involved processes, and they should be. Also, in terms of skilled migrant category processing, we have had an enormous amount of increased demand as opposed to forecast.
Just so it's clear, there really is no work visa that would be open to someone with no qualifications or experience, especially if it would be looking at removing them from their parents' residence application if they would no longer be seen as being dependent. So there really was no options there. Also during this month, the Minister announced, well, one of his colleagues announced for him, a reset of the immigration system. It mentioned that in 2019, half of all essential skills visa approvals were at the lowest two levels. It talked about upskilling staff, training them locally, just like so many other governments before it had said. This government said that it was going to fix things without actually saying how it was going to fix them. It was a 1-hour speech with about 1 minute of content. What wasn't included in that 1 minute of content was the SMC draw date and when the EOI draws would start, which we were assumed was coming soon. June started with more visa extensions for some workers, but only a very small group. There was another border exception, which we called the Olympic border exception, allowing earlier access to vaccines for those who were going off to the Olympics, as well as a right to re-enter New Zealand. Later in June, we had more details about the new accredited employer work visas that were then coming on 1 November 2021. We were still sceptical as there was just way too many unanswered questions. However, June also signalled the end of applications for accredited employers under the current scheme, or the then current scheme, with applications renewals closing at the end of that month. There was a big move for those working for under the median wage, where essential skills work visas had been reduced to just 6 months in length in July 2020. The government had now realised that this was a very silly thing to do, and those 6-month work visas were returned to being 12-month work visas for all applications then being decided. Despite the announced reset to combat these lower skilled roles, within weeks of announcing the reset, the government would double the length of those lower skilled roles visas. And we didn't actually ask about the SMC draw that month, I must admit, but we just assumed it was coming soon. July started with an announcement of 300 border exceptions for teachers, but from what we hear, 6 months later, none of those spots have been used. SMC allocations were still slow due to the low number of residence visas that the government had cut drastically 3 years prior. There was new numbers to be released in January 2020. The government failed to do so, and then in July 2021, they were supposed to release another set of numbers, which again the government failed to do so. Then on 7 July, the minister lapsed 50,000 offshore applications. Now, we're still looking at his legal right to do this. While those applications couldn't be processed with the border being closed, we still can't see any legislation allowing him to go and lapse mass applications. This one may come back to bite the government. We're still working on that. On 13 July, after another anomaly was spotted, teachers who were already in New Zealand could look at bringing in their partners. Some of those 300 teachers from offshore who never came had the right to do. So that was another anomaly that was fixed and should have been seen in the first place. A couple of days later, on 16 July, was perhaps one of the biggest announcements of the year, an apparent admittance that the employers in New Zealand were crying out for staff in every industry. Those already working would not need to prove there were no New Zealanders available when applying for a new visa. It was just be assumed they would just get an easy, fast work visa rather than having to jump through all those hoops. Those who earned under the median wage and had just weeks previously seen their new visas increase from 6 months to 12 months saw another doubling of the length of those visas, now being moving to a 2-year visa. So in under 2 months, we had, since the announced reset of immigration, we had gone from low-paid visas being 6 months to 12 months to 24 months, so an increase of 4 times in length. There'd be no need to provide medicals or police certificates if they had been provided before, no matter how long ago they had been provided. And the work visa scheme, due to start allegedly in early 2021, then in mid-2021, then in November 2021, would now be delayed until mid-2022, which we've been saying practically all along that it just wasn't going to happen in the time frame they were giving. Now, if you want to take advantage of the new work visa changes, you need to apply on paper. Though changes to INZ systems would follow as scheduled on 30 August, 6 weeks later. There would be a new employer supplementary form which would only be released and then replaced a month later, causing a lot of confusion from applicants who would apply and they'd be told, sorry, but last month's form is no longer valid. Confusion seemed to be reigning supreme as Immigration New Zealand seemed to have not been made aware of many of these announcements with enough time to put them into place. From what we hear, they were told within hours or perhaps a day or two before the announcements would take place, especially in relation to the offshore lapsed applications. I think they were told on the day or the day before. In August, the Prime Minister was starting to look at how to start opening the borders again. There was a 2-hour-long speech of how it was going to happen, but very little detail. There were some changes to make things simpler for partners and dependents of work visa holders who were falling under the new work visas announced the previous month. So they would have the same advantage of not having to provide new medicals or police certificates. Then we had a leak from Immigration New Zealand. An updated skilled migrant EOI form went online for a short period, which showed a couple of new point categories people could rely on if they were going to apply for an EOI. With an announcement of EOI's draws still due soon, was this a sign that draws were about to start and that the Minister had made tweaks to the SMC points as part of his reset? Well, no, not really. September 2021 included a video between Erica Stanford and the Minister discussing as to when the EOI draws were to start and what was soon.
Well, you will know that we're looking at that issue now, and we hope to be able to make an announcement on decisions that Cabinet is likely to make soon around some certainty for those people very soon.
With all due respect, Minister, you have been saying that you've been working on it and that you'll have an announcement soon for quite a number of months now.
We'll be able to bring back some messages for the public there. So, as I will repeat, we will have an outcome for those people soon, as I say, and have said already in this meeting. We'll have some news on that very soon. As I've said to Ms Stanford already, we've been working on this issue for some time, and we will have an outcome for those people very soon.
Why have you not done any of these things before now?
And the point that I made earlier is we'll have some news on that soon, and we hope to be able to take those options to Cabinet soon.
Can you give us an idea of when soon is?
Soon.
Soon is soon.
Very soon.
Very soon. That's new.
And what we thought was going to be the big news in September, there was a government announcement that MIQ selection would be moving into a random draw process, allegedly giving everyone a fair go at getting a spot in MIQ, as things had previously been plagued by automated processors who could get spots for those who could afford to pay for them. The new system would be an improvement, but still had issues. Refreshingly, Chris Hipkins, MP, stated that things would be adjusted as it went, admitting that it would not be a perfect system at first, something that we all knew, but it was nice to hear the Honourable Chris Hipkins actually admit that these things were going to be progressing as they went. Later in the month, we started hearing a lot of rumours. Now, we get a lot of rumours constantly, especially around skilled migrant category. Most of the time, we ignore them. However, we started to hear more and more from a variety of sources, too many to be ignored. So on 29 September, we put out a video on what we thought was going on, and that there was going to be a big residence visa announcement. A couple of hours after our video went online, we got an embargoed press release, and we went quiet because we can no longer discuss with people online what we were hearing because we now knew what was going to take place. At 6 a.m. the following morning, the one-off 2021 residence visa was announced. Now, we had estimated 100,000 residence visas were going to be granted. We were actually a little bit low. It was actually 165,000 residence visas. But there was still a lot of details missing, a lot of questions to be answered, and a lot of misinformation started flowing around. We were told that the rules would be available in October, with a suggestion that it would be early in the month. As it had been announced without the detail, people were making assumptions to fill in the gaps, and others were believing what was being said. This would be the start of a lot of online debates around how to interpret immigration rules. It would also mean that SMC draws would not restart until at least 2022 in August. October was the month we all spent trying to find the detail in both what was included in the new 21RV, but also who had missed out. And the Minister had made a choice that only those on work visas could apply, and only certain types of work visas. This left out partnership visas where the partner wasn't eligible but the other partner was, as well as high-level students who were often working full-time while completing PhDs. They were ineligible to apply, while post-study work visa holders could apply without even holding a job had they been in New Zealand for long enough. Now, despite many calls for more being allowed into this application, the Minister stated that the people had other pathways to residence. However, with the work to residence ending at the end of that month, the end of October, and SMC draws not taking place, they literally had no other pathway to residence. On October 10th, there was another leak of information from Immigration New Zealand giving us some more detail about how things were going to work with the new 21RV. With the removal of the work to residence, INZ provided updates that would allow those already under the scheme to remain lawful within it and still move to residence. However, with massive delays in processing, we would expect that every person that could move from that scheme into 21RV would probably do so. The Ministry of Education announced a further 1,000 students will be able to enter New Zealand, being 400 pilot trainees, 300 at degree level and 300 at diploma level. Now, following the Minister's approach, little detail was given in how this would work, who would choose the students or the process in applying. The promised 21RV rules were released on 29 October on a Friday evening in what lawyers call a Friday special. There was several holes that needed to be filled and a lot of questions. There was also some horrible interpretations being made by some in the industry, so the misinformation continued. Fortunately, INZ have some great staff who were able to confirm some of those questions so we could provide some clarity. Unfortunately, not all the information was being passed down to the call centre, so misinformation was coming out of Immigration New Zealand for a while as well. Not much took place in November 2021 as people were generally preparing for phase 1 of the new residence visa. The Honourable Chris Hipkins did announce later in the month that the New Zealand border would start to open to fully vaccinated Kiwis and other eligible travellers from Australia without the need for MIQ from 17 January 2022. This would extend to others on February 14th and then again to all vaccinated individuals from 30 April. Now, people saw this as being an indicator that the border was going to open at the end of April, but in reality this was mainly a focus around MIQ requirements. The announcement even mentioned that the reopening would be staged over time, and there was a lot of people who were expecting this to open, including some advisors who were pushing misinformation on that. At the same time, the minister indicated that Indonesia, Fiji, India, Pakistan and Brazil would be removed in early December from the very high risk classification. Now, while the preparation for phase 1 of 21RV seemed to be the biggest news that would occur that month, something came out of the blue. A decision of the High Court in the Afghan Nationals and Minister of Immigration case would have 3 major impacts on immigration here in New Zealand. First, the court would find that the order by the Minister of Immigration to not process offshore residence applications submitted before the lockdown was outside the minister's powers, and that all such applications must now be processed. Second, those who were granted a residence visa offshore would now be able to enter New Zealand on that visa when previously there was a distinction between those who were granted offshore and hadn't been in New Zealand and those who had it granted in New Zealand. Finally, the way that Immigration New Zealand had been interpreting humanitarian applications on the basis that they had to have exceptional circumstances occurring in New Zealand was found to be incorrect. These decisions would end up having major impacts on immigration here in New Zealand. Where possible, in the case of the humanitarian applications, the minister would change the rules, despite the court questioning the interpretation being used, and would set the rules to basically enforce that interpretation that immigration had been using. For applications for residence submitted before the lockdown, it was meant the pause was over. They would start getting processed. However, Immigration New Zealand had moved the vast majority of resident staff to work on the new 21RV visa, leaving a skeleton crew behind to work on these applications, meaning that while they were now going to be processed, it would be done very, very slowly. At the end of the month, based on Omicron variant, 9 countries from Southern Africa were added to the very high-risk country list. Now, the Honourable Chris Hipkins mentioned at the time that for the other countries, quoting him here, the newer model of 7 days managed isolation and 3 days at home for other returnees will continue. There is still good evidence that this model is safe and provides a high level of protection against the virus entering our communities. And that brings us to this month, December, which started with the first day of the new 21RV, the 2021 Residence One-Off Visa. It was supposed to start at 6 a.m, but instead it opened at 5 a.m, and then the system failed. What should take 20 minutes to do an application was generally taking hours. It doesn't appear to have been a load factor, as we tried to do it at 3 a.m. in the morning the next few mornings, and it was just almost as painfully slow as it had been at midday. Immigration New Zealand did release a second system to be used by lawyers and advisors, which was then of course released to everyone else the following day as people became aware of it and started using it anyway. That second system was eventually removed once the main system was corrected, but it was good to see immigration bringing that second system in. It wasn't good to see that first system failing in the first place. Now, the first visas were received within days of applications, though most would need to wait for a police certificate to be received. For some, further checks via a third party, an NSC national security check, would be needed, creating further delays. Now, people needed the additional check based solely on their country of citizenship, raising questions as to whether this was a breach of the law, discriminating against those from certain countries, which is a breach under the Bill of Rights and the Human Rights Act. Changes to the operational manual kept on coming, fixing holes in rush rules and as a response to the Afghan Nationals decision. In most years, we would see 10 to 15 amendment circulars per year. In 2021, we saw 64, with 15 of those being in November and December alone. The final ones came through just before Christmas, though they weren't actually that interesting. What was interesting was discovering that Immigration New Zealand had changed its mind on the handling of 21RV applications for those offshore. Through a knowledge-based article, which is the internal information system that Immigration New Zealand staff use, we found out that applicants who left New Zealand after applying would still have their applications processed and could use that visa to re-enter New Zealand once the visa was granted. This was a complete change from the original advice immigration had provided on the 21RV, stating that if you left the country, it would not be processed. Now, the day before that, on 21 December, the Honourable Chris Hipkins announced a move back to 10 days in MIQ. With a lot of European countries now swarming with Omicron, the very high-risk list was updated by removing everybody from it. So it was now an empty list. Everyone on an international flight with a positive case will be seen as being a close contact. The planned opening for those from Australia on 17 January will be delayed till the end of February. At the earliest. These changes would come into effect immediately for people landing from that point, but not those who are already in MIQ, who would still be trusted to follow home isolation rules. On 27 December, prior to receiving the result from his final test, a UK DJ in New Zealand for his third trip during lockdown would go out in Auckland, dining and drinking with friends and going to a nightclub 100 metres from where I live. His results came back as being positive for Omicron. Despite the government moving to change the MIQ rules, the community had now been exposed to the variant that was spreading so rapidly offshore. At this point, we're hoping that the community won't now suffer because the government prioritised a DJ over families or workers, or due to not wanting to wait for his test result. It's hard to do a video about 2021 without looking a little bit into the future, especially with a government that enjoys to make announcements of future plans. Of course, everything will be up in the air while the new variants spread. You know, we've seen Australia go from 1,500 infections to 12,000 in the space of 3 weeks. We've seen record infection rates, sadly, yesterday in the US, the UK, Italy, France, Germany, Portugal. They're all just going crazy infections and just exponential growth. So any plans the government has, at least in relation to the border, have to be an estimate. They have to be never being a fixed thing. So those who said, 30 April, borders opening, even the time it was questionable. Now it definitely is questionable and it's not going to take place. It's going to be dragged out until we can see some safety and security in opening the border. What this border being closed shouldn't impact, though, is skilled migrant. And I want to make a little mention here on what the Minister has said in Parliament. Now, skilled migrant is a category which was stopped, of course, the draws were stopped in March 2020 when the border closed on the basis that the offices were closed, and that was a fair enough point. But those draws remain stopped. And the Minister has mentioned that it was because of the high demand for residents. But of course, as we know, the high demand is based on the government cutting the supply of those visas. That is when the demand went up. It wasn't on immigration being overloaded, it was the government overloading them by not giving them visas to hand out. Now, on October 21st, Dr. James McDowell MP, the brilliant ACT MP, their immigration spokesperson, asked a question to the Minister asking whether the Minister would commit to July 2022 as being when the draws for SMC would restart. Now, the Minister states that the processing of the residence visa, being the 21RV, the new visa, will be the priority for Immigration New Zealand over the next 12 to 15 months. And he says, depending on how the processing goes of those go, we might be able to look at being able to do that sooner. Now, his estimate there of 12 to 15 months from October puts us through to October 2022 or January 2023 as being when immigration might sort of be looking at doing the SMC draws. Because he has said that he didn't want to restart those draws until we got past the 21RV visas. So even now, July 2022 may be a pipe dream. It may be something we will not see until the end of 2022 or the start of 2023. So the Minister's comments earlier regarding other pathways to residence, well, Minister, what are they? And here, on the final day of 2021, that was our quick review of immigration through the year. There'll be a lot that we have missed out, many protests, many events, a lot of heartbreaking stories of families struggling through separation that we have heard through the year and we've talked to you about and we've acted for a number of you. Feel free to leave your comments on the year in the comments below. We will try to respond to them, as I always do try, and let me know what you thought your highlights and lowlights of the year were. What we do hope is that after the trash that was 2020 and the trash fire that was 2021, that 2022 is something new, something better, something more unifying as a country and for the families out there. But until next year, from the last day of this one, kia kaha and stay safe.